All right, guys. So as I said, we're talking about effectively using WebEx and Zoom to facilitate engagement. I know that many of you have, in many respects, been forced into this environment of having to begin to use these web tools to facilitate your classes for your students. My name is Jeff Leffler. I'm an assistant professor of elementary education at the Mississippi State University Meridian campus. And I have led an initiative on our campus to facilitate what we call high flex or blended learning. And in that particular setting, what we've been doing for a number of years now is allowing students to choose how they interact with our classes on any given class session. We have a number of students that live all over the state, and actually some that live out of the state that participate in our classes. And so what we did is we took our live class meetings and made them available via WebEx so that students could log in. And so if you can imagine, we'd have a group of students live in a classroom at our campus in Meridian. We'd also have several students logged in via WebEx at the same time. And we've been facilitating classes in that way so that students who are both logged in virtually and students who are face-to-face have an opportunity to engage with our classes. When the pandemic hit, we were in a really great position because we were already used to using these online tools like WebEx and Zoom to facilitate our classes. So really for me, the only transition that happened is I stopped having that live classroom interaction there for a while. And we went solely to this synchronous online format using WebEx. And so my goal today is to kind of help share some lessons learned about facilitating engagement. I will add the disclaimer that the majority of my experience in online learning, and particularly synchronous online learning, has been at the higher ed level. But the research is kind of showing that there's a lot of things that transfer to the elementary and secondary level. And there's a pretty strong research arc around this idea of blended learning, having a combination of some asynchronous online, synchronous online, and some face-to-face type instruction in your classrooms, really producing some great outcomes for your students. And we're going to talk about that as well. What I would like to do now is kind of set the stage of what we're going to do for today. I have some objectives for us to accomplish throughout our morning together. We're going to become familiar with the WebEx and Zoom platforms. Obviously, we are in WebEx, and so I'll kind of talk you through some of the features in WebEx as we use WebEx throughout the morning. We'll also make some reference to Zoom, although we won't specifically be using Zoom today. Zoom and WebEx, now that WebEx has done a major upgrade recently, have a lot of common features and functionality. The buttons to make things happen are in a couple of different places, of course, because they're different platforms. But overall, we're going to just kind of generally become familiar with the platforms. Then we're going to consider the factors that are involved in establishing an online learning community in a synchronous online class. And so, just the same way you would in your physical classroom space, you want to establish that community of learners and establish how that community of learners interacts with one another in this virtual online setting. We're also going to look at some very specific ways to facilitate engagement in that synchronous online learning environment so that your students aren't just passively participating. And then we're going to end by kind of developing a sketch of a lesson plan for a synchronous online meeting, really kind of thinking through. Now, we're not going to write out a full lesson plan, but we're just going to kind of think through the steps and the order that we might organize things for that online meeting. And today's going to be broken out into two parts. I have an agenda here for the first part of the meeting. We'll spend about half of our time with the first part. Then we'll take about a 15 to 20-minute break in the middle, and then we'll come back for the second part of the agenda. So in the first part, we're specifically going to have a welcome and an opportunity to get to know with one another. I have an activity that kind of demonstrates an icebreaker type thing you can do in a virtual setting. We're going to talk about that WebEx and Zoom functionality and begin that discussion about creating that synchronous online environment. I want to stop right now and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. But we're going to do that in a little bit of a different kind of way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put you guys into some breakout rooms with 2 or 3 other people. And what I want for us to do is for you to meet somebody that's participating in this session. And when we come back from those breakouts, I want you to introduce the person that you had the opportunity to meet in the breakout. You'll give me just a moment. I need to see how many people we have in right now. Okay, so we're going to have most of ours paired up. We're going to have one group of 3. What I'm going to do is give you 5 minutes to have a conversation with one another, introduce yourself. We'd like to know what the individual's teaching, what grade level, and just some general interests that they have to add a kind of personal aspect to it. So let me put you in those breakout rooms. You'll be in a room with either 1 or 2 other people, and you'll have that opportunity to have that conversation. And just be ready when you come back to introduce your person. If you don't have the capability to have a microphone, you are welcome to use the chat feature to introduce. And I'm sure we have some people that are together as a group. If you'll just kind of in your group, introduce one another, and then when we come back to the main room, you can have a rep to kind of introduce everybody that's there with you. Let me put you in those breakouts. All right, everybody, we're all back together. So let's go ahead and have you guys introduce one another. It appears that Jennifer and Paula and Charlie were together in a group. Can one of you guys be the rep to begin those introductions? Hello, who is that?
Hey, this is Jennifer McKinnon.
Okay, yeah.
Paula Williams, she teaches SPED, and Charlie Speed teaches kindergarten. And I teach first grade.
All right, good deal. Lindsay and Rhonda.
Hey, this is Lindsay.
Hey, you want to share your introductions?
Yes, I was Rhonda Green, and she's a kindergarten teacher at Pearl Lower Elementary. And I'm a speech therapist, and I teach speech with kindergartners and first graders at Pearl Lower.
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Cynthia and Leslie. And guys, as we finish speaking, if you'll also go back and mute your microphone again so we can avoid feedback.
I'm Leslie Poe. I had Miss Cynthia Marble, and she teaches kindergarten at Pearl Lower Elementary, and I teach resource class special education kindergarten first.
Welcome. All right, we have Robin and is it Kai? Is that how you pronounce your name?
You are absolutely correct. It's Kai. I teach first grade at Pearl Lower, and Miss Gentry teaches kindergarten at Pearl Lower.
Good deal. Welcome this morning. All right. Was not sure if Martha and Stephanie were in their breakout. Did you guys get an opportunity to talk? I'm going to take that as a no. Eva and Jesse?
Okay, this is Jesse. We both teach at Pearl Lower, and we're in kindergarten.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
And then let's see, Ada? Ada, okay, Ada. And who did you have with you? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It was me,
Kim.
Kim Kelly, and Ada Sullivan.
All right, I had made notes on my paper, but Kim turned into a squiggle, so I could tell that it kind of looked like a K. I'm sorry about that. Welcome, everybody. So again, this is just kind of one way that you can facilitate some engagement with your students. Obviously, you know, we are all over the state, and it's a little bit harder to be engaged when you haven't had an ongoing relationship. But having a touch point like this where you actually have your students kind of chime in, it doesn't have to be an introduction, obviously. It can be reporting back of what you know they've been studying, some kind of essential question that you've asked that you want them to respond to, that kind of thing. And Stephanie said that Shirley and her partner are there, but their audio is not working. Certainly, we want to welcome you guys to the webinar today too. One thing that I would like to do is kind of set the stage for our conversation today. And let me get the PowerPoint back going for us. So I have this slide here that I want us to look at, and you guys may have seen this image before. It's kind of floated around social media. And what it's designed to represent is this idea of a difference between equality and equity. And one of the key things that we're running up against in trying to launch this virtual learning in the middle of a pandemic is that access to internet, and how that just isn't often an equitable access to that kind of robust internet access and connectivity. So I would wonder if someone would like to share with us kind of their experiences. Maybe it's your frustrations with your students and being able to access your classes in this virtual sense. Please either volunteer to talk to us by sharing your microphone, or if you'll just kind of respond in the chat feature, that's also a way to do that. So do we have anybody that would like to kind of chime in on your experience with your students being able to access your class in terms of their connectivity? So having a hard time getting the parents to sign up for Google Classroom. We got some people that are currently in school. Okay. So people that are in school, you have the benefit of having those person-to-person contacts. But as we know, we can all be surprised and find ourselves back at home. There for several days, it appeared that the COVID cases were going down. And then yesterday we had another spike increase. And another thing to consider, if you can get to that point to where your parents are signing up for Google Classroom and taking advantage of that learning management system, some people may be using Canvas or another learning management system instead. It really does enhance your students' learning experience. It has the potential to really kind of engage those parents in a better way because they do, potentially have access to see what's going on with your students and that kind of thing. Want to set up our conversation with a few other kind of thoughts, and then we'll get into the setting agreements activity that I want us to do. So some things that we value. I want you to think about, what are you most looking forward to this year? Why do you teach? What's motivating you? What's important about your work? And what does student success look like to you? I think it's important for us to kind of begin a conversation about doing something perhaps differently than what we've done it before, by really getting back to those core ideas of why we got into this in the first place. And I think that you'll find that a lot about what we say about doing learning in this more online synchronous sense using WebEx and Zoom really does in many ways reflect what we know to be best practices in the classroom. It's just a different way of doing those kinds of things. The other thing that I always like to kind of start these conversations with is just a little bit of a reference to the research that supports this idea of us doing some online learning. I think a lot of people intuitively kind of think that face-to-face instruction is the absolute best way to connect with students. And the really interesting thing is that the research does not play out to really support that idea. There's been several what we call meta-analyses. That's where they go back and they pick out research studies that have been done previously that had really good methodology, and they compare all of those studies to kind of see what's that overall finding we're finding about this particular topic. And in these meta-analyses where they're comparing face-to-face instruction with online instruction, the very interesting thing is that the online instruction is the one that's standing out as being the best in terms of student outcomes. Now, a disclaimer here to be aware of is that this research primarily has been in higher education settings because higher ed, of course, went to this online format before our elementary and secondary classes have. For many elementary and secondary schools, it's been within the last year that an online format has really been adopted. But there have been some pockets of schools that have been trying it and doing it for a while. But what they found is that the online actually performs better results. However, it's when they teased out and they identified the approaches that were more of a blended approach, where you still had that face-to-face component and you had an online component that really produced the best outcomes for students. And so I think in the future, you can imagine a setting where you'll have your face-to-face students and you'll have some type of online component that you're also facilitating, not just because of COVID and what we're dealing with now, but just kind of as an ongoing approach, because it seems to be supported in the research to be a better way. This other study did the same thing. You can see it looked at 51 published studies. This one didn't find an effect size for student achievement, but when you teased out again those that were not just purely asynchronous online, but had that combination of face-to-face and online instruction, you found that there was a positive impact on student outcomes. Another one, this one was looking specifically at types of knowledge gain, knowing how to do something. The blended approaches, again, being more effective than the face-to-face. And I think it's important for us to kind of consider that because, again, we kind of intuitively think that the face-to-face format is the very best way to connect with students. And really, if you think about it, students don't pay attention in class. Students engage in behaviors that are disruptive to class. Just by virtue of having an opportunity for this kind of virtual setting, if all of your students are in different places and you're facilitating engagement and keeping them going with the class, they're not over there kind of getting into mischief with one another. They're able to be more focused and more engaged because they're not distracted by one another. Now, one thing that I do want to kind of say along the way as we're having this conversation today, please do use that chat feature. The same way in that regular classroom that you end up having students having sidebar conversations, what we found is that it's really great in terms of facilitating engagement if you encourage those kinds of sidebar conversations. So if you'll, open up your menu and go to the chat section and open up that chat little window, you have the opportunity there to select to send to everyone. And so if you have a question or a comment that you want to share with everyone, please use that to do that. But if you also would like to select any person, if you'll click that arrow down next to where it says everyone, you can pick individual students that you can send that to if you want to have a conversation back and forth. Now, you also have the opportunity to turn that off if you don't want that happening for a particular session that you're doing with your students. But again, we found that it's a very good way to kind of facilitate ongoing engagement. So please do use that throughout. So in this blended learning approach, we have some aspect of online, some type of small group interaction, some type of collaboration between students, and then some individual work that students are doing. And this really represents shifting a mindset. The traditional teaching approach in that face-to-face setting typically errs on the size of a one-size-fits-all, where blended learning allows for a lot of personalization. In a traditional teaching, there's a lot of teacher control, whereas in blended learning, there's a lot of flexibility in how students engage in learning environments. One thing that I want to say to you is, as you're thinking about engaging in online learning, you always want to make sure that your students are working harder than you are. If you're working harder than your students, then you're not allowing them this kind of flexibility and this kind of responsibility that they need to be taking for their own learning. And so that's something that we're going to kind of try to change your mind about today. In traditional teaching, the focus is on compliance with classroom rules and all that kind of thing, where in blended learning, it's really more about trying to get individuals to collaborate with one another. And the traditional model works characterized by conformity, more creativity in the blended approach. And in the traditional teaching, we have that traditional cumulative grading, whereas in blended learning, we're really doing more data collection, a lot of formative assessment to inform our instructional practice. And so I said that I wanted us to do this setting agreements activity. This is something that you'll want to do when you begin using Zoom or WebEx to engage with your students, so that you can kind of set those parameters around how you're going to interact. Now, I've had this kind of standard setting agreements that I like to use with adult groups like we have today. The idea of remember the kids, assuming and practicing positive intent. So if somebody makes a comment that we don't necessarily agree with, we assume that they still have positive intent in the way that they shared it. A lot of times we as adults or individuals, we judge ourselves by our own good intentions and everybody else by their actions. And so that assuming positive intent give somebody the benefit of the doubt about what they really intended versus what they may have said. The other setting agreement that I like to include is to say the thing, if you have a comment, if you disagree with something, if you have a concern, to voice that so that we can have a conversation around that. I'd really appreciate it if you listened and you contributed to the conversation. And then the other thing that we want to do is to use evidence to inform our decision making. A lot of times we bring a lot of preconceived notions to the table, and I really want to challenge you to think about how things could be different moving forward, if you will allow evidence to inform what you're doing in your classroom. Now, this setting agreements is a protocol that you can actually follow and use. And let me share that document with you. And I will share this with you when I send you the recording of this presentation. And so the setting agreement activity, this is something that you would do one time as you begin engaging with a particular group of students in this online format. And what it does is it kind of helps you to establish kind of your classroom rules and norms that you're going to have for interacting. And one of the great ways to approach this, instead of doing what I just did, where I say, here are the ones that I want to use, you can have some suggestions like that. But as you're working with your students, you really want to give them an opportunity to have ownership, the same way you would do in your face-to-face classroom of establishing those rules and norms for how you're going to interact. Give your students that opportunity to contribute to this. This works best with a group of about 16. You can do it with larger groups by doing a little bit of additional steps in terms of putting students into breakout rooms to have some smaller conversations and then reporting back out to the big group. Really, you just need, if you were doing this in the physical setting, a couple of sheets of chart paper. Within WebEx and Zoom, you can actually just kind of have sharing your screen on a Google Doc or something like that that you're working in the virtual setting. Ideally, you're going to have your group commit to about 7 agreements that they're going to have for their interactions, plus or minus 2. So you could go up to 9, you could have as few as 5. But you kind of set the initial goal to have about 7, and that's based off of current brain research that kind of indicates the maximum number of items an individual can attend to at one time. If a group wants more, there's likely some work that you can do to kind of categorize some of them under one agreement. But you could go up as high as 10 if the group just really insisted upon that. But it's really best if you can narrow it down to the fewer things. So the steps of engaging in this setting agreements activity is to explain the purpose for it. You might engage for the virtual setting in a conversation like I did at the very beginning, where you talk about how distracting it can be if everybody shares their microphone at the same time. So one agreement may be around, how do I get attention so that I can communicate my point of view? Another thing may be, in some groups, teachers will insist that all of the learners have headphones and a microphone. That really is the best way to interact in a virtual setting, because the sound is going directly into their ears through the headphones. Their microphone is recording just their voice directionally, what's going into that microphone, versus recording what's going on in an entire classroom. And that really kind of helps to reduce all of that feedback and everything that we've kind of experienced a couple of times this morning as people have shared their microphones. So that you might have a setting agreement about that. Everybody will wear their microphone and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, thinking through all those kind of functional things, but also thinking about the things that are going to cause students to be engaged, to facilitate those types of interactions that you really want to have. You can direct everyone to take a minute to reflect on their experiences in groups and kind of some of the common problems that happen when you're interacting in groups, or the great things that have happened when they've had great group interactions. Put the students into pairs and have them write down their top 4 most important agreements. And then each pair has to agree on those 4 and prioritize them. Which ones are the most important? Then they select items from the sample agreement list that you have created ahead of time. They may choose to reword or do something, but they're trying to get theirs to kind of align to the agreements that are on the sample list. Or they can suggest something that's not on the list, because I mean, they certainly can come up with their own ideas. And then what you'll have is each pair to then whittle that down to the 2 most important that they agree upon, that they would need to feel safe and challenged to do their best work in the environment. Then you have each group begin to share in rounds. And then they narrow it down at this point to the most important one that they feel like they need to communicate to the group. You collect all of that either in the Google Doc, or if you're doing it in your classroom on that chart paper. And group discussions then initiated about the meaning of the particular agreements and particular wording. If disagreement or confusion arises, you're going to check with the original pair to see what they really intended and meant by that, and then try to come to some conclusion. Then you get the group to talk about any kind of burning ideas that may need to be added as you build out this list. You want to make sure that if you're dealing with a group of people and no one mentions the idea of confidentiality, to think about including that in the conversation, because certainly you want people to feel safe and free to share their ideas and to feel like they're not going to be at risk of people sharing those with others. Then you ask the group to officially adopt the list that they've generated, again, trying to narrow that down to about 7 that they're interacting with. And then as an option, you can have this conversation of how will we help each other adhere to the agreements that we've adopted? What are the ways we're going to remind one another about the agreements when we're having infractions and that kind of thing? And then you go through a debrief and reflection type activity, and just kind of talk about this process of developing them and putting them into place. And so this is a really kind of important thing for setting the stage for how your students are going to interact in the group setting. Now, for many of you, because you are in a face-to-face school setting, likely you're going to be using WebEx or Zoom to bring students that have been quarantined into your classroom. Actually, 2 days ago, my daughter got sent home from school because another child that she's in every single class of the day with was diagnosed with COVID. And so now she has to stay out of school for 14 days. The thing that would be the worst thing that you could possibly do would be to just teach your class the same way you've always taught it, just with the camera peering in for that student to see what's happening. You need to be thinking about creating a setting agreements type thing like this that negotiates how the group that's live face to face is going to interact with the student, or maybe it's a collection of students if you have several students that have been sent home on quarantine, how they're going to interact. You may also need to make a consideration about how everybody's going to interact with one another if everybody in the group ends up being quarantined for a period of time. Because certainly, just because everybody has to be separated from one another does not mean that your class cannot move forward. There's certainly an opportunity to do that. The other thing is to, in that particular setting, is you've got to think about what absolutely has to be broadcast, what has to be kind of this live interaction, and then what pieces can we break out in terms of doing individual work, doing partner work in a virtual space, and that kind of thing. And we're going to talk about that in the second part of the session this morning. So before I move on from that, any questions that you have about the setting agreements activity or anything that I've just mentioned? Please use the chat, or if you want to share your microphone and ask, certainly do that as well. Do you think this is something that you could use in your classroom to kind of facilitate better engagement? How would this be applicable for kinder and first? Okay, so obviously you're not going to, in any setting, share this document. Okay, so this document is just something for you to think through the process of how you're creating rules for your engagement. You know, if I was in a face-to-face setting with kindergartners, then one of the great recommendations is to talk to them about the classroom rules and then represent those visually in some way with pictures or that kind of thing. And so if you're engaging with a group of kindergartners in a virtual setting, you would want to kind of have that same kind of conversation. You probably, when you think about that sample list of agreements, you would probably want to have those represented with different pictures or images so that you can talk about it. And instead of them just having to come up with the entire list altogether, you would probably have like, here's some recommendations, and have them pick and choose the ones that they feel like are the most important to include in their agreements. But just because they're young does not mean that they can't have a contribution to establishing some group norms. Preschool teachers for years and years and years have been engaging students in those carpet time conversations at the beginning of the year about how we're all going to get along, how we're going to share materials, all of those kinds of things. And the research plays out when the students have a voice in creating those norms and those rules, they're much more likely to adhere to those rules and norms. So that's what you would want to do with them. Let's see. Okay, so that was the only question that I'm seeing there. Anybody else have something they wanted to share? Has anybody done something like this in their classroom before? So we have somebody that's done this in person. Good deal. So again, going back, we won't go through this activity today of creating the setting agreements, but for us, I'd like for us to adopt remembering the kids, assuming the practice of positive intent, saying the thing, listening and contributing, and then using evidence to inform your decision making. Let me see, somebody else made a comment. Okay, yeah, but if you guys are all together, yeah, have one person to kind of share your answers with us. Does somebody want to share the mic and kind of talk for the group? And Ada, who all do y'all have there together? Because that'll help me when we do some other things going forward. If you'll just type the names in the chat, that'll be helpful for me. All right, thank you guys. So another thing that we can do as we are sharing out some beginning this process of engaging in this kind of virtual class is identifying these zones of comfort, risk, and danger. Okay. And I would like for us to engage in this process with one another right now. Okay. So essentially, what we have is the scale of there's things that we are very comfortable with. There's a low amount of challenge and there's a low amount of performance that are involved in that. So something that's probably in your comfort zone is sitting on your sofa, turning on Netflix and just kind of passively watching a film or a television show or that kind of thing. Something that puts you in your comfort zone. Sometimes things that are even more challenging for other people, maybe a comfort zone type thing for you. If you've been teaching for a number of years, leading a group discussion in your class may be a very comfort zone type of thing. Then we have things that are in what we call the stretch zone or the risk zone. And these are things that have a medium amount of challenge, but then they have a high amount of performance that are attached with them. And that stretch zone is this area of best performance. It's where we're really kind of at our peak. We're appropriately challenged, but we're engaging in work. The way that I kind of like to describe this from my own personal point of view is, I like to work hard. I have a very strong work ethic, but there are some days that I go to work and I mean, it's just like there's this kind of positive hum of activity. I'm like getting things done. I may be doing some things that I'm not used to doing, like putting together a report of some work we've done or leading some kind of special presentation or that kind of thing. And it's stretching me because it's not something that I just typically do all of the time. But on those days, I go home and I'm tired, but it's that good tired. It's that tired where you're like, I feel like I've accomplished things, I've gotten things done. Maybe I feel like I've grown as a person because I've given forth some very kind of positive performance in that appropriately challenging realm. Then the other part of this scale is what we call the panic zone or the danger zone. The panic zone or the danger zone is where there's a high amount of challenge, but there's a low amount of performance. So, for example, a lot of people have this kind of fear of public speaking. Okay. So, if you are have that fear of public speaking, and your principal calls and says, I want you to speak to the entire faculty tomorrow about how to support the social emotional development of your students. You may prepare for that presentation. You may go into that presentation, but because this is a panic zone or a danger zone type of activity for you, it's probably going to be very challenging for you to give that presentation. You're probably going to stumble on your words. You're probably going to, perspire. You're gonna be in that kind of stressed out zone. And because you're in that zone, your performance isn't going to be that great. And then that's going to make it even worse because you're kind of adding to that level of panic and that level of danger. Okay. So I want us to think about this idea of engaging in instruction in a variety of formats. And what I'd like for you to do is use the chat feature to respond. Now, I know that we got a whole group of people that are there together, so you'll have to kind of come to some kind of consensus, or kind of, maybe indicate 3 of us said this and 2 of us said the other. But I want you to think about these zones of challenge. The first one that I want to put out there is the idea of leading a mini lesson in your face-to-face classroom. Is that something that's comfort zone, stretch zone, or panic zone for you currently in your place in your career? So let's respond in the chat, or if somebody wants to share what the group consensus with their microphone, you can do that too. So Kai says that's a strength zone. Ada said that's a comfort zone thing. I didn't think we would get a lot of responses about that being a panic zone thing. Although I will say I'm sending my students out to do their field experiences next week. And on top of having to deal with COVID and all that kind of thing, for many of them, we have a teacher assistant program at MSU Meridian. And so usually our teacher assistants go out in the field with it really just being more of a stretch type experience for them. But our students that, they graduated from high school a couple of years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, and now they're going out to do their field experiences. Many times this is a panic zone for them right now. Charlie said normally a comfort zone, but we have a new reading program, and Kai had emphasized that too. It's panic when there's the new program that you're having to present at the same time. And we're all dealing with all these procedures and technologies that can put us into the panic zone. One of the things that that you have to be particularly mindful of in this current environment is to really kind of step back and evaluate what you can do and what you just cannot do. What your students can do and what they just cannot do, and what your parents can do and what they cannot do. And using something like this zone of comfort, risk, and danger can kind of help you make some decisions about those things. Martha says, especially for us elderly old school teachers. And I don't believe you guys are elderly and old yet, right? My parents are public school teachers. My parents were 19 and 17 when I was born, so they're young to be my parents. But my dad teaches art at Stone County Middle School, and my mother teaches elementary for the Forest County School District. And my dad's a real whiz with technology, so the technology aspect has not been as challenging. It's just kind of negotiating that idea of I've got some students that are virtual, some students that are face-to-face, and how do I integrate that together? So that's going to be our next zone of comfort, risk, and danger. The idea of doing that same mini lesson, but having to do it in either WebEx or Zoom. Is that a comfort zone, a stretch zone, or a panic zone for you? All right, so lots of people are saying that we're in the panic zone. So I'm just going to go ahead and gather that if you're actually having to do face to face and WebEx or Zoom, that's definitely going to put you over into the panic zone. Okay. So hopefully, what our goal for today will be is to get you familiar enough with WebEx and Zoom that you'll begin to kind of play with it, and you'll hopefully, through some exposure, some reassurance, that kind of thing, move the needle over just a little bit to get more into the stretch zone in terms of using it instead of just immediately being in that panic zone. The other thing that I want to reiterate again is this idea of trying to do too many different things at the same time. I'm going to show you how to use some different types of features. But for many of you, the thing that you need to begin with is, just simply engaging in like just one of these things at a time until you become comfortable doing that. I'll tell you, when I began teaching in the blended format where I had the live students in the classroom and the students that were logging in, I was probably edging over into that panic mode. I did have some sessions that I left, and I didn't feel like I had a high level of performance, but I knew I had a high level of challenge. But as I began to try it out and engage with it, I moved over more towards that medium range. From time to time, I actually find myself in the comfort zone if, like you guys have said, it's a subject that I have taught before, that I'm very comfortable with presenting. I can, at this point, move over into the comfort zone. But I'll tell you, I've been doing this like this since 2017. So I have some years of experience doing this, where I realize many of you have just days, weeks, or months that you've been engaging in this format. It has been very interesting, though. I have some colleagues that are older. They call themselves digital immigrants. And as they, found themselves in this situation in the spring where all of our classes had to go online, they adjusted more quickly to being able to use Zoom and WebEx than they anticipated that they were able to. And oftentimes it's just the unfamiliarity with the program and the format that really puts us in that panic zone, instead of allowing us to get into the stretch zone. All right, so what we want to do is to begin talking about the synchronous online functionality that you have available to you in Zoom and in WebEx. Now, what particular program do you guys have access to? You'll just kind of populate that in the chat to kind of give me an idea of what we're doing. Okay, so Lindsay's got WebEx. Good. WebEx Google Classroom. All right, awesome. Okay, that's good because we're using WebEx, it's a lot easier for us to talk about WebEx. And like I said, Zoom has some very similar features. The primary benefit to Zoom that I've found is it's a little bit more intuitive. However, WebEx has done some upgrades recently that have made it a little bit more intuitive, like Zoom was. The big benefit to using WebEx over Zoom is that Zoom is available for free to everybody. And you may say, well, why would WebEx be a benefit if you have to pay for it? The thing that makes WebEx the benefit of being a paid service is it's less likely that WebEx will be overrun with activity and have failures due to that. Whereas that really is kind of a potential risk with using Zoom, because anybody at any time can set up a free account, and with Zoom you can meet with one person in a Zoom account for as long as you want to for free. You can meet with a group of people for up to 45 minutes for free before you have to have a paid account. And so there's lots of people using Zoom for that reason, because they don't have to actually pay for a service fee. For those using WebEx and paying that service fee, you have a greater level of support, and potentially the infrastructure is being supported to make sure that it continues to function appropriately. Because we're using WebEx, I'm not able to share with you so that you can see, but you guys are in WebEx right now. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so that we can talk about some primary features that we have in WebEx. First of all, you have this virtual meeting room. It's the room that looks like the Brady Bunch opening sequence with all the faces. And nobody's sharing their camera with me, so I can't see all of y'all's wonderful faces, but you guys can see mine right now. In each of the squares, you can roll your cursor over that square, and it will open up for you as the presenter some functionality. You actually get 4 different things that you can do with that individual. The first icon that comes up when I'm scrolling over Kim Kelly's right now is the mute button. It's very important for you as the presenter when you're using WebEx and Zoom. While you ask your participants to mute themselves when they're not talking, you also need to do some monitoring of that. And that's really going to cause a better experience for everybody if you're mindful of when people have shared their mic when they really shouldn't be sharing it at that moment. So a real easy way to mute somebody who is unmuted is to just scroll your cursor over their image on the screen and then click that mute button. If somebody's mic is unmuted, underneath their image, it's going to show in the bottom right corner that microphone in green, and that will be an indication to you that their mic is actually live at that moment. So you can do that. The other thing that's an option when I scrolled over Kim's icon is a little chat bubble. And what that does is it opens up a chat window in the chat thing specifically with Kim, so that if I needed to make a comment to Kim, I can do that directly with Kim, and it won't go to the overall group. So we can have a private conversation. Now, I will say you need to be very careful with private conversations to be mindful of, are you communicating something privately with the actual person you intend to communicate it with? A lot of times, you'll forget and you'll be sending a message to Eva, or you think you're sending a message to Eva, but it's really still going to Kim because you didn't make that change. And somebody mentioned earlier that they had sent a message to an individual instead of to everyone. So you also want to be mindful of that. The other thing that you have the opportunity to do is to make that individual a presenter. And so basically what that does is it hands over the controls of WebEx so that that particular person can share their screen, they can share their PowerPoint, they can kind of take over as the leader. Now, at any point, because you're the host of your meeting, you have the opportunity to take that control back. Okay, so you still have a locus of control. The other thing that you have an opportunity to do is to pin a particular person. If you're really wanting, let's say you had so many people in your room that you had more than you could see across the bar, you can pin a particular person so that you can maintain your sight on that person. That may be something that you would want to do. If you have a particular student that's not been as engaged in class, you've asked them to share their camera so that you can view them. It'll just kind of make sure that their image stays in your queue when you're sharing things and that kind of thing. Now, in the main window at the very bottom of the screen, you'll also see that you have a mute button. And I'm really glad that WebEx made this upgrade, because the old mute and unmute button was always just a picture of a microphone with a little slash through it. And it would turn red when it was off, and then it would turn a different color when it was on. And like, even after years of using WebEx, I would look at it and think, is it really muted or is it not muted? It just wasn't clear. And now they've got it set up where it turns green, and you can actually see as I'm talking on my screen, the green's kind of going up and down with the cadence of my voice. And so it's telling me that I am, in fact, not muted. I can click that button really quickly and mute myself. The other really neat feature with WebEx, because as the leader of the group, when you invite a student to talk, just the same way you ask them to mute their microphone when they're not talking, it's very helpful if you mute yours when a student's talking, so that you're not the one contributing to the feedback in the room. It really is also a better practice for you as an instructor to use some kind of earbuds or headphones and a microphone that you're directly speaking into. Your students really are going to get the best quality of audio if you'll do that for them. I don't necessarily have to do that here in this setting. I'm at my house. The only other being here besides me is the dog, who's locked in the room. And so I don't really have that risk of bringing in that extraneous audio. So I don't need that at this point. But in a classroom setting in particular, and definitely if you have an entire group of students in your room, you might want to consider having an actual microphone there. And there's lots of headsets where you can have the earbuds and the microphone all integrated together. In my classroom at MSU, when I was doing the blended approach where I had the face-to-face and virtual learners logged in at the same time, I actually purchased, or the university purchased, but a lapel mic. It wasn't that terribly expensive. I mean, you have to make sure you purchase one that you can plug into, your computer. But it really kind of created a much better sound experience for the students. The only caveat with that is if you have what's called a unidirectional mic, it's a microphone designed just to pick up what the microphone is pointing to, and that's what a lapel mic typically is, or a handheld wireless mic. The issue with that is it's only going to pick up your voice. So if you are facilitating a discussion in your class where the students are also talking back, it's better to be, in those cases, to use a unidirectional mic like the one that's built into your laptop if you have a laptop. I also have this Yeti microphone that I use from time to time. And it is a unidirectional mic that you can put in the middle of a space, and you can see the microphone goes all the way around. It picks up the audio from all angles in the room. The issue with that is if you have students that are being disruptive in that physical classroom space, then you're going to be picking up that audio too. So you really need to have that setting agreements, really establish those things for how that's going to interact. Next to the mute button, you also have your stop video button. That's where you can go back and forth between sharing your video. You'll notice to the right of the mute button and the stop video buttons, there's a little arrow that points down. That's an indicator that you have a menu that you can open to make some decisions. So what it's going to do when you go to that drop button is it's going to bring up a menu that says camera, and it will show you the cameras that are available to you. I actually have a built-in camera in my laptop, and I have a second camera that I use for particular times when I'm needing to do a particular thing. It actually sits on top of my secondary monitor I have here in my office. And the reason that I like to use it from time to time is I can actually pick it up and I can point it at something. So I can use this kind of like as a dock cam or that kind of thing. And so I have the opportunity to pick that camera if I want to use that camera instead. You have that same functionality. Oh, and the other thing that WebEx now has is you can also change to a virtual background under that video monitor selection. It has a series of like built-in backgrounds that you can pick. One is to have a blur, so it just would blur out what's going on behind. So I'm going to apply that to my camera. And so basically you can just see that you can't see what's, real good what's behind me. Another opportunity that I can do is I can put myself in an executive space. And so you can see that I just kind of created, it looks like I'm in some kind of hotel conference area or that kind of thing. I can go to the beach if I want to. So there I am at the beach. So you have a variety of different backgrounds that you can use. This background really kind of gets into that whole equity discussion that I began our conversation about. Some students, if they're having to log in from home, may be not comfortable sharing what that home environment looks like. Some of your students maybe should be concerned about what their bedroom looks like, and they're not. And so you may have a conversation with them about that too. I definitely need to have that conversation with my 14-year-old that she needs to clean her room. But it gives you that opportunity for your students to kind of put themselves in a space where they're not necessarily revealing things about their lives that they don't feel that comfortable sharing with everybody. So that's another option underneath that you can discuss, and that may be something that you determine in your setting agreements, that everybody's going to use a virtual background. You'll also in the setting agreements maybe decide, are we going to share cameras? What are the exceptions from when we're not going to share our camera view? You certainly get better engagement from your students when there is a sharing of the cameras. But like I said before, you don't get as good of connectivity if you're on a bad internet connection when you're sharing your video. So we have the question of how do you access that feature? You should, at the bottom of your WebEx panel, see the mute button. And then to the right of that is the video button, either to start or stop your video. The little arrow next to that video button, if you click on it, it's going to open up that menu. And it's going to give you your camera options that you can pick. Most of you just have one camera that's available to you. You'll also see settings where you can get into some more sophisticated settings that honestly, you can save for later when you become much more comfortable with this. And then the bottom option there is change virtual background. If you click there where it says change virtual background, it'll open up a little box where you can see your current view of what you look like. It'll give you a preview. And then underneath that, you'll see your different options. You guys may not have it because of the way this particular session is set up, and you guys are guests in MSUs. I'm almost certain if you created your own meeting, you would find that particular thing available to you. But it is also possible that your particular district has turned off that functionality. And so you might want to have a conversation about can it be turned on and that kind of thing. So definitely look into that. The other place that you may look, there's a secondary menu when you have WebEx open that pops up at the very top of your screen. At least it does when you're a Mac. I have at the top of my screen, it says WebEx meetings, and there's a file and edit, a share, a view, and audio and video. Under that audio and video setting there's a place where you can do your camera settings, your speaker and microphone settings, and then also change that virtual background. So look for it there too instead. And while we're at that top menu, there's also a participant. You have an opportunity there to mute yourself. It's a secondary way you can mute. Let me try to share this and see if it will let you guys see it. I don't know that it will, but we're going to try. Now, I think it's just going to show you the WebEx panel. Hold on. Yeah, it will not let me show you. But anyway, at the top, there's a place that says participant. And under participant, one of the important settings that you might consider setting at the very beginning of your meeting is it's got an option to mute everybody when they enter the meeting. And so that's definitely a thing to consider, so that instead of having to ask everyone to mute their microphones, it would automatically mute their microphone. There's a button there where you can allow anyone to share. So that would be where anybody could share their screen, their PowerPoint, all that kind of thing. That is, particularly risky if you have a student that maybe you're concerned about would share something that is inappropriate. You want to turn that off so that only you can share. And that's really a decision you can make. Even if you have students doing a presentation during your class, if you didn't want them to be able to share their material directly, you could have them send you either through Google Slides a presentation or send you a PowerPoint presentation. And what you would do as the presenter is to share that particular PowerPoint, and you would run it. And it's a little bit less savvy because they have to say next, and you have to hit the next slide versus them actually being able to do it independently. If you feel like you have a safe space, you've got your setting agreements in place, then you can leave that where the students can actually share their content. And that really provides for a more interactive experience with your students because they can share materials and you can kind of hand off between yourself, individual students, and groups of students and having a conversation throughout your class meetings. The other thing is there's an option there for entry and exit tone. When I set up this meeting, I set it to where it would not do that entry and exit tone. WebEx defaults to playing that tone. And what it would do is if, for example, Rhonda left the meeting all of a sudden, it would make this ping, and it's a cue to you as the presenter that somebody left. that may be valuable to you in your class setting. If you're really wanting to monitor if a student is staying in the session, then maybe you would want to hear that tone. For me personally, and when you have a number of people in a meeting like this, it can become somewhat distracting because you constantly hear ping, somebody came in, ping, somebody left. So I just typically turn that off altogether. So again, going back to that menu at the bottom of your panel, we have the mute button we've talked about, the stop video button. The third option is the share button. When you click on that share button, it's going to open up a number of different options for you. For example, in my computer, I have two screens. I have my primary screen and then I have a secondary screen. So when I click on share, it shows me at the top those two screens that I can pick from to share either one. One of those options I'll actually share with you right now, my second screen. You can see the panel that I used to create this meeting. I created this meeting on WebEx.com. I logged in with my university credentials. For you, you would log in with the credentials that your particular district has given you. And it gave me this opportunity to create the meeting. Underneath, let's see, my preferences. Oh, it's making me log back in. I can also go here and set those audio connections that I want to do, the entry and exit tone that I just mentioned. It gives me the option to do that too. I can find my past recordings where I've done recordings and all those kinds of things. So, and then you also have a personal meeting room that you can use at any time. If you go here to this link and copy it, you could send that to a student and say, hey, come join me in my WebEx room right now. And then you would just go to start a meeting. And then when they got in with that link, you would both be in there. It's kind of like a public meeting space that anybody that has this link, and that link is static. It's always the same. You don't have to create a different meeting every time. They can just go and be there. And then you can also see all these different meetings that I've created, and you can join them from here. But anyway, I was just showing you to sharing feature. I can share either screen. It also gives me, when I open up that option, a number of different programs. For example, I have Google Chrome opened on my computer right now, and so it gives me the opportunity to share Google Chrome. I have the PowerPoint document that I have been using that's open on my computer. And so it also has the opportunity for me to share that PowerPoint directly. And so you kind of have to make a decision about, is it more valuable to you to share a screen, or is it more valuable to actually share, for example, the PowerPoint or a document that you have? The downside to sharing the PowerPoint is that you have to do some switching back and forth if you're wanting to go between the PowerPoint and some other things. So say, for example, you have 4 slides and then you want to play a video. You're going to have to stop sharing the PowerPoint. Then you're going to have to go over and share the video and then come back to the PowerPoint. If you're just sharing a screen, the downside to sharing a PowerPoint is you're really just going to see, and I'll show you, more of this angle where it's not in the presentation mode because you're sharing just what's open on the screen versus the actual PowerPoint. But the nice thing about this is if I have a video that I wanted you guys to see. All I have to do is have it also open on that same screen or slide it over from the other screen. And now we've kind of very seamlessly switched back and forth. But with sharing the screen, you're also getting all of the garbage that I have all over my screen. I tend to use my desktop as a dumping ground for everything I'm working on and then clean it up every so many days. So that's also another downside to sharing a screen. The other thing, though, that you definitely need to be mindful about is if you click on that share button at the very top left, you'll see a little drop down box that says optimize for text and images as the default. If you click the little down arrow, it also gives you the opportunity to optimize for motion and video. And the reason that that's important to be mindful of switching back and forth, if you have it optimized for text and images, essentially what it's doing is it's grabbing an image, it's kind of producing it at a better resolution, and then every so many seconds, it's kind of going back out and looking at what you're sharing at that moment and grabbing it again. So if you're switching between PowerPoint slides, it's going to kind of reset with each slide and give you a really good quality image of the particular slide that you moved to. If you play a video while you have it optimized for text and images, it's going to make the video look very choppy. It'll show a picture and then like the video will have continued to move through and then it'll show you another picture. And so your students aren't going to get a really great experience seeing the video because it's just going to go all the way through the video. If you set it to optimize for motion and video and play a PowerPoint or show a Google Doc or a Word doc, it's going to be a very kind of fuzzy looking document that's not going to be very crisp in terms of the lines and everything. And so you want to make sure based off of whatever you're sharing, whether it's a video or a still image, that you pick the best option for that particular thing. One other thing about sharing motion and video. When you're sharing a video, you do need to make sure that your audio is on your computer, because your video is playing, it's capturing that image of the video, and WebEx is actually generating your audio for that video from the computer speaker system. So you'll want to make sure that's turned up while you're playing the video so that everybody can hear everything. So you have a variety of different things that you can share. Right now, for me, the options are the two screens, Chrome, PowerPoint, Outlook, because again, it's open on my computer. Microsoft Word, I have several Microsoft Word documents open right now. I have Microsoft Teams, Excel, Zoom, and that's it for right. No, actually, I have a couple other things. Let me see if I can do this. Are y'all seeing my WebEx panel now? I'm not really sure what it shared. It was showing me WebEx as an option to share. I wasn't sure if it was sharing it with you guys. So that's mute, stop video, share. The next button is recording. I don't think you were able to see what I was hoping it was. I was hoping it would share the panel, but it really wasn't. So, so the recording button, if you click on it, it gives you a little box where you can actually start the recording, and it has a little countdown, and then there's a little X to the top that you can X out of it when you're ready to go. as you're recording throughout the meeting, you can click on the button and pause the recording. So it'll stop recording for a period of time. So let's say you were doing a mini lesson and then you had your students do like a group conversation that you didn't really want to record. You could pause it. The key with that is that you got to remember to start recording again if you're going to do a next part of your lesson that you want to capture. I find that a really great rule of thumb to make sure that that happens is to assign somebody in the group to be your reminder that you need to start recording again. So just having some, student in your class or maybe one of your virtual students that it's their job to speak up when you get back from that small group discussion to say, hey, make sure you start the recording again. Why would you want to record your class session? Has anybody thought about that? Why would you want to record? Obviously for absent students. I record every single one of my classes, and it's primarily for that reason. It's for the students that are going to miss class. They have an opportunity to go in and view that recording. And in fact, in my college level classes, my stated attendance policy is that you have the option to attend the class live, or if you need to, you can view the recording within a week of that class meeting and complete the associated assignments. And I treat it as if you attended the live meeting. I don't even treat it as an absence. Now, of course, your district policy, you'll have to establish what that means for you guys. But for me as a college instructor, I was able to make that determination. Now, I will add this little sidebar to that. It's a lot less busy work if you actually attend the live session, because if you watch the recording, then you have to produce some kind of product to demonstrate the fact that you viewed the recording. So for my students that have been absent, have viewed the recording, they may have a reflection that they have to write on that. I may provide them with some guided study notes that they have to fill in as they're viewing the recording. They may have to create some kind of product, something to demonstrate that they actually viewed that recording and participated like the other students. The students that participate in the live class session, we do all of our in-class learning stuff live together. And so they're still producing similar work. They're just not having to do quite as much writing because they can instead just voice in the class discussions their participation. Somebody mentions national boards. It's a great way to kind of capture some class things to use the recording feature. The other important reason to consider recording your class meetings is that whole equity of access with internet connectivity. If you have a student that just does not have a robust internet connection, they are going to have an intermittent experience with your live class meeting. You may see them come into the session, and then you'll see this little spinning thing over their icon, and then it may give you a message that they've left the session, and then they've come back into the session. Typically, that's not the student themselves coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving. And I always tell everybody, if you see that happening, first step is, hey, Lindsay, how about you stop sharing your camera? Maybe you'll have a better connection. The second thing is to say, hey, maybe you need to log out, restart your computer, and then come back into the room, and maybe you'll have a better connection in that case. Another really great recommendation is to, if at all possible, have your student actually hardwire into their internet system, with an Ethernet cable or that kind of thing, versus connecting to the wireless signal. If they can get a hard connection to the internet, they're more likely to have a better experience with their connectivity. But even with all of those kinds of things, some students just don't have reliable internet coming into their home. And so it's only going to be as reliable as what they have coming in. And typically, while they may have that very intermittent and choppy experience with their internet connection, if they go back and watch the recording, because it's been processed and kind of downsized and all that kind of stuff, you can still see everything, hear everything, all that kind of stuff. It's just not as big of a band of information coming in at one time. It tends to give them a more fluid experience viewing the session. And they can at least go back and watch or rewatch the parts that they, were kicked out of the room or whatever. Even somebody with great internet service, and guys, I've seen some of this difference in equity of experience. I'm actually taking a doctoral class in higher ed administration. I had done a minor in that when I did my PhD program. And I wanted to take a couple of more classes in that area of some things I was interested in. And in that higher ed class, most of us are employees at Mississippi State. Many of us are attending class from our offices on campus where we have really great internet service. Others are from home, but most of those people, are more affluent. Frankly, they have better access to high-speed internet. And those classes just kind of flow seamlessly. I mean, most of the time, everybody's got a really good video, really good audio connection, and it's just kind of a beautiful expression of what this virtual experience can be. And hopefully, as infrastructure is put in place across our state, what many of our students will also have access to going forward. But in my undergrad class that I teach, I have a very different experience. I would say most of my students have access to high-speed internet. I have a lot of classes that have teacher assistants in them, and they'll choose to actually stay at their school where they have a better internet experience while they're attending class. But some of them just don't, and it has a real effect on their participation in the class. So having that backup of that recording is one way that I can better ensure some equity of access to all of the students in my class. It's definitely not the best way. I mean, the best way would be for everybody to have that robust high-speed connection, the appropriate hardware, technology, everything, so that they could have a great experience. But the recording is at least one way that we can back up. The other nice thing about WebEx and its recording is it automatically transcripts the session. So if you have a student that has an accessibility issue, they'll have that captioning on the video. Now, I will say WebEx does not do the best with Southern dialect, and there are several words I say that it does not get correct, but it does generally do a really great job with that. And so that's something else to keep in mind. At the bottom of my panel, it says next to recording breakout sessions. I'm not sure if you guys see that because I don't believe I've given you guys that functionality to create a breakout session. But and breakout sessions is a very new feature to WebEx. It's only been in place for about a week or two at this point. But it has revolutionized what I'm able to do in my classes in terms of putting students into pair groups and into small groups to work on specific tasks and to have that greater level of interaction. As the presenter, you actually have to turn on the breakout session, and you have in the advanced settings when you're creating a session, a place where you can go in and turn on breakout sessions. It's also in that menu that I was mentioning at the top of the screen. One of the things says breakout, and the first thing underneath it, it says enable breakout sessions. So you would go there to enable breakout sessions in your own WebEx panel. And once you do that, you'll have the button next to recording that says breakout sessions. And what it'll do is it'll allow you to add a session. You can tell it how many people, how many different breakouts you want to have. So let's say you had 16 students and you wanted to pair them up, you would tell WebEx to put them into 8 different groups. And then once you tell it to do that, at the very bottom of that panel will be a little blue button that says Start Breakout Session. You can click Start that breakout session and it will automatically send all of those students into those paired groups. And it creates a new panel for you on your screen, very similar to the chat panel that you have available and the participants panel where you can see everybody that's in the group, where you can actually go in and manage those breakout sessions. While your students are in the breakout sessions, you still have access to the chat feature, so you can send a message to everybody in all of the breakout sessions through that chat feature. The other thing that you can do is that at any point, you can personally join any of the breakout sessions. You can go in and out of those breakout sessions as many times as you want to. So you can go in and make sure that students are engaging in the types of activities and conversations that you wanted them to have. You can also, just kind of pipe in and not talk, just kind of listen the same way you would do in your live classroom, providing that proximity, to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. You can do that by just simply joining a room. They'll see that you came in and sometimes they'll stop and ask if you needed something, but you can just tell them, go on, I'm just, observing your conversation, and you can do that. At any point, you can add a different breakout session. Let's say you wanted to do a pair share for 2. You can come back later and break everybody into groups of 4 at another point. You can also create some manual groupings. Now, I didn't do that with you guys today because I don't know you well enough in terms of who I would want to put into some manual groupings. But as you know your students, you can make some decisions about how you want the students to be grouped in those breakout sessions. Again, new feature to WebEx. It's a feature that Zoom has had for a while, and honestly, WebEx has seen how people have really appreciated that functionality in Zoom, and they fortunately have made it available for us here in WebEx. Next to breakout sessions, the next button is a little circle with 3 dots. It gives you some more options. It's just a direct place where you can switch your audio if you had multiple microphones to pick between. Let's say you had your directional mic that is attached to your headphones and you wanted to switch to another mic that would pick up the entire room. You can do that quickly. There's an option to connect to a video system. That's a little bit more sophisticated setting that is more of an advanced WebEx training that maybe we'll do down the road. You can lock the meeting where nobody else can get in. That's just one of those kind of security features. Zoom has had a lot of criticism of people coming in, being able to hack into Zoom sessions that are not supposed to be there. Zoom has added this functionality where you actually can set it up where anybody that tries to get in is put into a waiting room, and you as the host have to allow them to get in to kind of try to prevent that from happening. WebEx is known for its security protocols, though, and one of those options is to lock the meeting. Once everybody's in, nobody else could get in at that point. You have an opportunity to invite and remind there. So let's say you invited somebody to a session and they've not shown up. You can send out a reminder for them to join. There's also a copy meeting link here. And this is a really neat feature. It'll copy the link to the meeting. So let's say that I have somebody that's not typically part of my class. Let's say I want to have a guest speaker join the class. I can copy that meeting link and I can send it to that person, and then they can, from their computer, click that link, come into my WebEx space, and I can invite them to share with my students. So that's something that I really encourage you to think about how you might use. I've had the opportunity, like in my college classes, to bring in some like national experts on things that would have cost thousands of dollars to have had them travel to the university and do a meeting and all that kind of thing. Many times, just a very quick speak to my class, they're willing to do pro bono because it's just so easy to do. They just log in with their computer and they share. So something to think about because it definitely can enhance your presentation. One thing that does really kind of enhance this virtual space is to think about as many different speakers as possible. Now, you guys have not been as willing to share your mics and to talk to me today as I would have liked. But when you have an opportunity to have other people contribute to the conversation, it really does enhance the experience for everybody. Think about when you're watching a TV show, even like the local news, they'll have the anchor talk for a minute, and then they go to the field reporter story and play that video. And that field reporter will ask a question, somebody responds to it, they'll ask another question, somebody else responds to it, and then they come back to the studio and the anchor shares a little bit more information, and then they hand it off to the weatherman. You need to think about that same kind of thing when you're thinking about organizing what you're doing in WebEx or Zoom. Because it's way more interesting when you have those transitions. Children's television programming, those transitions happen in a matter of seconds, and their little minds have been trained to go after and seek that level of stimulation. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to reproduce what, Disney or whatever cartoon production is able to do. But you can kind of think about those types of principles and think about how you can best kind of facilitate some breaks and different transitions throughout what you're doing, having additional people talk, whether it's students in the class, a guest speaker, a co-teacher. Great way to approach a Zoom or WebEx meeting would be for you to have somebody in your professional learning community to also put together a lesson with you, and for you guys to kind of team teach that. It just is way more engaging than having a single speaker. Unfortunately, the way that I'm having to do it today, where you just kind of hear me for a little while. So some things to think about in terms of using that copying of the meeting link. It's also a space you can go to if somebody's struggling to get in. They say, oh, I can't find the button to get in. You just go there, copy the meeting link, email it to them, and then they can click that and get right into the session. The other option that you're going to have there is to start live streaming. You actually have with WebEx, unless your district has this turned off, the ability to live stream your meeting to like Facebook or some other platform. Definitely a more advanced feature and not necessarily something that you want to do. However, if you have students that are struggling with internet connectivity, streaming to like a YouTube channel or that kind of thing may be something that could be beneficial to you. Not something I've tried yet, though, but definitely kind of a neat feature. And then your next button at the bottom is a red circle with an X. That's your opportunity to end or leave the meeting. Once you as the host end a meeting, it's going to kick everybody else out of the meeting. You can actually leave the meeting and the meeting will continue without you. That actually happened to me a couple of weeks ago when they did the upgrade to WebEx. They evidently had some bugs that had happened, and I actually got kicked out of one of my undergrad classes. And it was kind of funny when I returned because I left the meeting. It picked one of the students to assign as the new host, and she was freaking out thinking, what am I supposed to do right now? But anyway, if you leave the meeting as the host, the meeting continues. But if you're the host and you end the meeting, it's done. Everybody's pushed out and nobody else will be there. The other buttons you have at the bottom, at the very far right, are some buttons to control your participants panel. The nice thing about the participants panel is it gives you a list of everybody that's in the class with their names. I love this. Between having the screen with all the different boxes with everybody's name and then having the participants list, you have an opportunity, maybe even better so than you did in that face-to-face classroom, to call on specific students. There's some semesters where I would have very large classes at the university and it would be very hard to remember everybody's name. But when you have this functionality in Zoom or in WebEx to see everybody's name, it not only helps you to remember names better because you're seeing that name associated with a face so consistently, but it also, kind of serves as a crutch in some respects that you can call people by their name while you're learning the name, which again helps you to better learn their name. But the other thing in that participant panel is at the right, it gives you a button for their microphone. And so this is the place that you can go. Let's say that you're talking and you can hear noises coming in from somebody else's microphone. You can real quickly open that participant panel, go through, and if somebody's microphone is listed as green there, you can click on that button and it'll mute it for them. So you can do that as the host. A participant can't necessarily do that. There have been many times I've been in meetings that I wished I could have muted somebody's microphone because the host didn't know that they had the ability to do that. And it can become very distracting. The other thing that you have in the participant panel when you're the host is two buttons. One says mute all, and the other one says unmute all. And that just kind of gives you an opportunity to very quickly turn off everybody's microphone. Or I don't know too many places, unless I had a very small group of people that I was interacting with, that I would want to unmute everybody's microphone. Really, once you get more than 3 people into a WebEx, you really need to be trading off, turning on and off the microphones. You can also open the chat feature and see what's being said in the chat feature there. And then it gives you an option for more panels. One of the panels you can open is a notes panel. You actually have within WebEx the functionality to where you can assign one note taker for the entire group. That's really more for if you were doing a small group work and you're assigning a scribe to work for the small group. And everybody can take notes. And so that's another way that you can kind of encourage some facilitation and engagement by your students, by having them to take notes throughout the session. And you can actually see in some reporting that you can get from WebEx how much your students are using that. So it's just kind of another benchmark to see, are they engaging with the content? You also have the ability to turn on and off closed captioning there. What that means is you would assign somebody in real time to provide some closed captioning. That you would really only do that if you had a particular need for that service and feature. And then the other thing is a polling option where you can pose a question and then have everybody respond to that. So I just sent out a poll. How's everyone feeling about using WebEx so far? So the poll is just another feature that you have available for you. And that would just be an opportunity to get like a very quick response from the entire group about a particular thing that you're doing. Okay, guys, it's 10 o'clock. I want to stop for just a minute, give you an opportunity to ask any questions you have so far. But we're about to take a break for about 15 to 20 minutes. One thing that's a very real experience that people have had with WebEx and Zoom is what they call Zoom fatigue. And what we've found is you really can only do a virtual meeting like this for a period of time before you give people an opportunity to kind of get up and to walk away and to do something else. So let me open the chat so I can see any question. So Martha's saying, if the technology would work well, it would be okay. And yeah, that really is a real factor. You've got to have, the access to the kind of internet connectivity and equipment that you need. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back from our break, okay? So let's take a break at 10:20. We'll come back and we'll do the second part where we get into some kind of specific things that we can do using WebEx and Zoom to kind of facilitate some more active engagement as we're using it. So I'll look forward to seeing you in about 20 minutes. Please get up, walk away, reset yourself in a different environment and rejoin us at 10:20.